Hello and welcome to Inside Latin America and to Mexico City's main square, the Zócalo. The Aztecs called this the belly button of the universe, the center of the world. But in more recent times, that center of gravity has been shifting northwards, across the border and to the United States. As for Mexico, so for much of Latin America, a region of more than 30 countries and 650 million people, but which Donald Trump is trying to reshape into a sphere of US influence. We'll take you with us as we look into that, starting with our correspondent Teresa Bo in Buenos Aires.
Thank you, John. From Mexico to Argentina, Donald Trump is reshaping Latin America with a strategy that includes pressure, military intervention, and political alignment. The approach echoes what Donald Trump himself referred to as a new version of the Monroe Doctrine, sometimes referred as the Donroe Doctrine, which is a vision of Latin America firmly under US influence. But across the region, the push raises familiar questions about democracy, sovereignty, and whether the United States has returned to an era of open intervention in its own backyard.
It was the first clear sign that Donald Trump was taking Latin America seriously, not just rhetorically, but militarily. The capture of Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro was a turning point, signaling a return to direct U.S. intervention in the region.
Clear under our new doctrine, and it is a doctrine. We will not allow hostile foreign influence to gain a foothold in this hemisphere.
The Trump administration wants to keep China and Russia away from the U.S. sphere of influence, and also take advantage of the region's vast natural resources like oil, gas, agriculture, and mining. Former Ambassador Diego Aguilar says the U.S. message to Latin America is clear.
The Monroe Doctrine of 1823, that was an indirect approach. It says, now you remain out of the region. Now the message is to us. You belong to us.
In Cuba, pressure is mounting. The U.S. has tightened its grip through energy restrictions and diplomatic threats. Colombia is caught in the middle, balancing cooperation with Washington on drug trafficking while resisting U.S. pressure and threats of intervention. And the Caribbean is no longer just a transit zone. It's become a front line for the so-called war on drugs. Luis Moreno Campo is a former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. He says the new U.S. approach raises concerns about the rule of law.
Trump is transforming a justice operation into a killing operation, into a war operation, allowing him to kill people. This is not a war. They are not, again, drug dealers are criminals. They are not conducting hostilities against the U.S. So you cannot use the war frame for them. This is a crime against humanity, which is a systematic attack against the civilian population.
In Argentina, the relationship between Donald Trump and Javier Milei has emerged as one of the most important political alignments in the Americas. Relationships in the region are now being defined by alignment with the U.S. Support brings benefits. Resistance brings pressure, isolation, and risk.
Donald Trump is pushing a hardline agenda on migration, trade, and security, all issues that impact directly Mexico, where President Claudia Sheinbaum is facing growing pressure from the Trump administration, including calls to send American soldiers to fight the Mexican cartels. We go to Julia Galeano in Sinaloa, a state long at the center of Mexico's security challenges.
Thanks, Teresa. We are in the heartland of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the groups that the U.S. designated as a terrorist organization early into President Trump's second term. From here, we'll take a look at how this state has become the flashpoint for a new and more aggressive era in the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Mexico, one that, for Mexico at least, is increasingly centered around national sovereignty.
In Sinaloa, the threat of U.S. military action is no longer just campaign rhetoric. It's a looming and constant shadow over the bilateral relationship. Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, President Claudia Sheinbaum has played a high-stakes balancing act, attempting to pacify Washington without alienating her own base.
The people of Mexico must be certain of one thing: their president does not bow her head. Your president will defend our sovereignty above all else and will continue to act in the interest of justice as we always have.
To keep Trump at bay, Mexico has militarized its borders, ramped up fentanyl seizures and kingpin arrests, and extradited dozens of high-ranking criminals. But it recently became clear none of it was enough. In a historic first, the U.S. indicted sitting members of the Mexican government, including Sinaloa's governor, Rubén Rocha. He is a close Sheinbaum ally, and he now faces U.S. charges of drug trafficking and weapons possession. He denies the charges, calling them a political witch hunt, but the move has forced Sheinbaum into a corner.
It took less than 72 hours after the indictments were unsealed for the leadership in Sinaloa to collapse after both the governor and the mayor stepped down, saying they were trying to protect their party and facilitate the investigation. But for many here, the damage is already done. The link between the state and organized crime etched into the public record, not by a domestic court, but by a foreign power.
For Mexico's battered opposition, the U.S. indictment is a lifeline.
No, en absoluto.
I'm not at all concerned about our sovereignty. What the U.S. did was present evidence to a grand jury which determined there's a possibility they're guilty of criminal conspiracy with organized crime.
While the geopolitics play out in the halls of power, a brutal turf war continues to reshape life on the streets. For 2 years, warring factions of the Sinaloa cartel have fought for control. More than 3,000 people are dead. Thousands more have disappeared, including Graciela Duarte's 22-year-old son, Isaías.
Solamente la de Dios. I can only hope for God's justice now, because on this earth, nothing is done. My son's been missing for a year and a half, and there's never been a proper investigation. We are still right where we started.
President Sheinbaum may speak of defending Mexico's sovereignty, but for the thousands of families here living through this cycle of disappearance and death, that is far from their biggest priority. Julia Galeano, Al Jazeera, Culiacán, Mexico.
Thanks for that report, Julia. So President Sheinbaum, who actually lives just behind me in the National Palace, which is on the main square itself, is in a tricky spot with President Trump. And not just on security issues, there's the economy too. And Mexico is very reliant on the US. Just think about this. About 80% of Mexican exports head to the US, and almost 40% of foreign direct investment coming into Mexico is also from the US. And then there's the different size of the two economies. The United States one is about 15 times the size of Mexico's. And President Trump has really weaponized that trade imbalance to play hardball with Mexico, especially with the upcoming renegotiations of the free trade deal that the two countries share with Canada. Earlier on, I asked Alex Gonzalez, the editor of the Mexico Political Economist, if the country just has to roll over and do the US's bidding.
The thing you've really got to remember is that, bar no other country in the world, Mexico is the most important relationship the US has. Even though, sure, the US economy is only 1% dependent on Mexico versus Mexico's 1/3 of its economy dependent on the US, actually, the entirety of US growth comes from that relationship with Mexico. Now, why is all of US growth coming from Mexico? For a very specific reason. AI has been driving that economic power for the past few months and years in the US. And yet, where is all the hardware coming from to supply that growth? It's coming from two countries, Taiwan and Mexico. Without Mexico, the US economy simply wouldn't be growing.
So a different take on that there. And it seems that in terms of speaking about this, we've been talking about it as a bit of a struggle, the United States imposing its will on Latin America. Are there certain situations, country, in which actually this new US attention is quite beneficial?
So, depends obviously if you're pro Javier Milei in Argentina or you hate the Venezuelan regime. Obviously you love Donald Trump. But even in places where you wouldn't expect it, there's actually a few good changes that you can see. The most notable here in Mexico is the fact that Marco Rubio and his State Department has openly accepted the fact that the US is responsible for the flow of weapons coming into Mexico funded by US drug money.
And you briefly mentioned there Venezuela. If there was ever a test case for the Monroe Doctrine, for the US imposing its will on Latin America, it's that country right now. The US captured its president, and they're at the right at this moment exerting a lot of pressure on the Venezuelan government to get what they want. Is this a successful blueprint for the US?
We've got to be really careful about distinguishing between the tactical success and the strategic implications later on. Obviously, tactical success was enormous, right? They whisked into Venezuela, captured Maduro, and took him out of the country. And yet, what does that leave you with? If you're the Venezuelan opposition, you're actually incredibly disappointed with the Trump administration because they've been chucked overboard. What does that mean? It means that the US is far more interested in tethering Venezuela with the US economy than any actual political change on the ground.
But if you're the US, that's a good idea, no? It's certainly a lucrative one.
I mean, if you're Donald Trump, that's literally the only thing you care about. And a lot of the time you'll see people he's, ideologically close with, but also working with people that you think actually he shouldn't be that cozy with, like, for example, Claudia Sheinbaum, who gives him what he wants, sometimes in dribs and drabs, and he's therefore very happy to work with her, and that's perhaps the way to deal with him.
Alex Gonzalez there, editor of the Mexico Political Economist. And that's it from us. Thanks for watching our special segment from Latin America. And now for more news, we head back to our global headquarters in Doha.